As a young Christian, I was given a job, a government job, working in a rehab house, a halfway house where people would come out of prison and they would have drug addiction, alcohol addiction that caused them to go to prison. And so on their way out of prison, they would have to spend 13 months in this house in order to get on with their lives. And the director of the house, he figured out after a lot of hard work, he found out that unless they have a spiritual conversion, a spiritual experience, they never recover. So he hired me. He says, your job, this guy is not a believer, your job is to make sure they have a spiritual experience, that they have a conversion experience. Because they will not recover, and we want them to recover. And so for 13 weeks of that first period of time when they were in the house, they had to come in and hear me preach and hear me lecture them every day. And because it was mandatory, it's required, some of them hated it. They would never go to church, they'd never listen to a preacher, and here I'm a young, skinny, brand new Christian, and I'm telling them everything about Jesus. And it was tense. It was a really awkward thing to do. And God used it in my life and used it in their life. But I remember this guy, Mike, I think it was his name, and he came into the program, little tiny guy, and wanting to be a big, strong guy, and he just didn't have the stature, but he pumped iron in prison and got these muscles, and he would always go around without a shirt on. He had swear words tattooed all over his body, and he had shaved his head. He wanted to look menacing. He wanted to look like he was the worst, the bad dude in the church, in the group, so that no one would mess with him. And so he'd come in and he'd flex his muscles and put his swear words right out there where everyone could see them. And he would glare at me, and I'm up there teaching the Bible and telling him about Jesus, and he wanted to send the message to me, I hate you. You are not getting through to me. I have to be here, but you're not going to have any effect on me. And he would sit there with his arms crossed his chest and stick out his bottom lip and let me know, I'm not listening to you. You're not getting through to me. You got other people in this program getting baptized and all of that, but you're not getting me. Well, one night the Lord got through to him, and he began to cry and began to shake, and he said, I want what you're talking about. And I wasn't sure if he was acting. I wasn't sure if this was for real, but I prayed for him, and I didn't feel anything. I didn't know whether I prayed for him, and he said thanks, and off he went to bed. Well, all that night I was wondering, did that really happen? I mean, is this for real? Did Mike really meet the Lord? Well, the next morning, he came down for a class, and he's got Band-Aid, plastic strips of Band-Aid all over the swear words, all over his body, because he's so embarrassed by the swear words. And I thought, that has to be real. I mean, his conscience is showing him that these things are real. The other thing is he picked me up one time and says, I love you, man. I love you, man. And for him to love me, because he hated me so much, that I knew that something was happening on the inside of him. And he was there for every Bible study. He wanted a Bible. He was studying on his own. It was wonderful to see a black and white transformation. I mean, really from darkness to light. And the whole building knew it, that something happened. And he got the biggest Bible. He wanted everyone to know that he was reading this Bible. It was an amazing transformation, amazing thing to have happen. During that time, I started coming down to a Bible school here in New York. And so I'd be gone for a few weeks at a time, and I'd go back. And so on one of those trips, I went back and I was very much looking forward to seeing Mike and seeing how much he's grown and how much he's changed. When I got back home, he was avoiding me. He wasn't around to see. I wanted to meet with him and have a meal with him or something, and he'd be putting me off. I don't have time. I got this meeting. I can't. And so he wasn't answering my phone calls, and he wasn't responding, and something's wrong. Yeah, that fellowship, the openness, all of that seemed to be gone. And when I finally saw him, have you ever seen a fish that's taken out of water for a long time and their eyes got that dull glaze to them? His eyes were dull. And I remember them being so filled with light and so shiny and filled with love. And now they were just kind of dulled over. And I said, man, what's happened? What happened to you? And there's some girls in the program who were pretty difficult pass, and it was a co-ed house, and I thought, well, he's been with one of those girls. And then there were some prostitutes that were hanging around, and I thought, boy, I wonder if he's got involved with that. I mean, because then he'd experienced death. He'd all the life, all the presence of the Lord, all the newness of life would leave, and it would account for his evasiveness, for him not wanting to be in fellowship, for him not being open and honest and transparent, and it would account for the dull glaze in his eyes. And so I wanted to sit down with him, and finally I did, and I said, Mike, there's some rough girls hanging around here, did you get involved with one of those girls? He said, no. Something's not right. And that downward spiral just continued, and sometime after that, he walked into a bank downtown with a sawed-off shotgun to rob the bank, and got caught and ended up back in prison. And I went on a chase of trying to find out which prison. I needed to get to him. I needed to talk to him. I knew I had the antidote to death. If I could just share with him and lead him into forgiveness and get him back on that upward spiral. And for months, I tried to track him, to find out what prison he was in. And for the first little while, the prisons were saying, you can't see him. I said, but I'm the chaplain here, and I have credentials to be able to do that kind of thing. And they said, for the first few months, he's in solitary confinement. All I could really do is pray for him. And it would be a couple years before we actually would sit down face to face, and I could actually ask him, Mike, what happened? I asked you before, did you get involved with one of the girls in the group home? And what caused you to lose all this life? He said, you asked about that. He said, and I told you it wasn't this particular group of girls. He said, but it was this. And he described what happened and how the enemy got in and how all that life was lost and death took over. And but since he's been in prison, he's starting to get back and starting to walk back with the Lord again. But it was such a shock to see someone so much alive. It's kind of like seeing young people where they're in the front row and they're waving their hands and they've met the Lord, they've had a fresh encounter with the powerful Holy Spirit, they prayed for the sick, they're people being healed, they're beginning to prophesy. And then something happens in their private life where eventually they're not raising their hands, and now they're not in the front row, they're in the back row with their hands in their pocket, and they're not really engaged, and you can just see this metamorphosis in reverse. It's the word, like a transference. No, that's not the word. Where Jesus said they've been translated from the power of darkness to the kingdom of his dear Son, only now this is in reverse. They're going back into darkness. Next thing you know, they're not coming to church. Next thing you know, they're not hanging out with having fellowship. Their life is not open anymore. And it's because gradually death is taking hold of them. But it happens.